I don't think it really comes as any surprise to you guys when I say that Earthbound is an incredibly important game to me. You know, as if it wasn't evident by my wall of virginity that appears in almost every single video I've ever made. So, much like everyone else I know who's played Earthbound, I am deeply fascinated by the final boss fight with Giygas. To me, the final battle with Giygas is incredibly special, since unlike every other boss in the game, it isn't simply defeated by hitting it with powerful attacks. It's an endurance test to make sure Ness and his friends are able to survive the incomprehensible onslaught of Giygas' attacks. All the while, Paula's prayers struggle to claw through the darkness to reach the people of Earth and grant the party strength. It was a kind of final boss that hadn't really been done before, and I don't really think any other final boss since has come close to replicating the feelings of desperation I felt when I first encountered it. The fact that praying, an action that aside from this one fight is entirely useless, is the key to overcoming Giygas is incredibly smart too. It's almost like the developers were expecting the players to realize that their attacks have zero effect on Giygas. So out of ideas they'd start mashing random actions hoping something works, mirroring the desperation the party feels during the fight. In short, I think the Giygas fight is incredible, and it's everything a final boss should strive to be. It's cool, it's creepy, it's unlike anything the player has really encountered before. And most importantly, it wraps the underlying themes of the game up with a nice, nightmare-fueled bow. However, with the final boss as intangible, and frankly nonsensical as Giygas, there will be those who try to find explanations for it. What exactly is Giygas? Why did it take this form when compared to how it appeared in the prequel? What is it meant to represent? Giygas is one of the most hotly discussed final bosses of all time, and it's almost entirely due to the constant theorizing by fans as to what Giygas is supposed to be and represent. And as all things are, not all theories are created equal. There are some excellent Giygas theories that I think are very well thought out, and then there are some really bad ones that I really don't like. So today, to change things up, I wanted to share my own personal theory as to what Giygas is meant to represent, as well as discussing the most famous Earthbound theory of all, and why I think it's terrible, being the infamous Giygas abortion theory. If you have no clue what the hell I'm talking about, you probably had your eyes cartoonishly pop out of your head, with the word abortion being said in relation to some goofy-ass video game that came out over 3 decades ago. But I can guarantee you that there are more people who know about this theory than there are people who have actually played Earthbound. I'm not saying that to gatekeep Earthbound or anything. Loads of people have played Earthbound, and I think treating it as some sorely overlooked game nowadays makes zero sense. There are many official ways to play it, and Nintendo even treated it and its predecessor being added to the Switch as a huge headline during a Nintendo Direct. Mixed in with its strong online presence, and constantly being listed as an inspiration for some of the most widely discussed games made in the past 20 years, more people are aware of and have played Earthbound now than ever. I'm simply saying that to further exemplify how ingrained into Earthbound's identity this theory has become, to the point where there are people who haven't even heard of Earthbound who are aware of it. Before I explain the abortion theory and why I think it isn't very good, I feel it necessary to explain my personal interpretation as to what Giygas is supposed to represent. And for that, I need to ask you guys one question. Are you familiar with Rorschach tests? Created in 1921 by Swiss psychiatrist Hermann Rorschach, a Rorschach test is an exam where a patient is given a series of random blotches of ink and asked what they see in them. These were used to assess a person's psychological state. For instance, if I were to be giving a Rorschach test and gave a patient this ink blot, and they told me that they saw a murder scene, I would be a little bit worried. Despite being disavowed as being incredibly unreliable, Rorschach tests are one of the most famous methods of psychological evaluation, and have made their mark on society. Appearing across many forms of media, Rorschach tests are something that most people are familiar with. Personally, I was first introduced to Rorschach tests when I read Flowers for Algernon in middle school. And here I am nearly a decade later and I'm still not okay.
Why, Toad School, why?
Now, before anyone goes and has a hissy fit in the comments, no, I'm not suggesting that Giygas wasn't designed to have a specific meaning, and that it's all dependent on the player's interpretation. I think stuff like that is lame, and seeing many things I enjoy ultimately devolve into, it can mean whatever you want it to, is stupid and makes me feel like I wasted my time. Like, look at Petscop, for instance. It's one of the most interesting pieces of fiction I've ever seen, and takes great advantage of the Let's Play format to deliver an intriguing world filled with mystery. It's so creepy and captivating. It's the type of thing people will be trying to replicate for years. With that said, seeing the creator come out and say that his intention wasn't to build a concrete narrative for us to uncover, rather to lay out a series of pieces to see what the audience can come up with, was a little frustrating to me. I still like Petscop, and I think that this is a totally valid way to present a story, but I can't help but feel a little dissatisfied when we were never meant to find out what the true meaning of the series was, you know? Anyways, before I further specify what I believe Giygas is supposed to represent, we need to look at how this final battle was created, specifically towards the experience that the creator of the game went through that ultimately inspired the battle. When he was little, Shigesato Atoy was going to the movies and accidentally went into the wrong theater and saw a traumatizing scene. The theater he walked into was playing the movie, oh my god, I'm gonna butcher this, Kinpi to Barabara Shibishin.
憲兵とバラバラシ美人
which roughly translates to the military policeman and the dismembered beauty. The scene in question shows a murder, but to the young Atoy, he thought he was seeing something much, much worse, as he thought he was seeing someone force themselves onto a woman. With this in mind, I think I can say with pretty high confidence that Giygas is ultimately meant to represent the loss of one's innocence. And the reason why Giygas' attacks are described as incomprehensible is because often what causes people to lose their innocence is something that they don't fully understand. Atoy didn't realize what he was seeing wasn't what he thought it was, yet it still traumatized him, enough to where he dedicates the final boss of one of his biggest projects towards replicating the experience. When I was discussing Rorschach tests, I wasn't trying to imply that Giygas is a literal Rorschach, rather a metaphorical one. You're presented with these images, these noises, these lines of dialogue that are meant to evoke the experience of losing your innocence. It's not vague so that every interpretation is valid, it's vague because everyone loses their innocence in different ways. I know people who lost their innocence when a loved one died, or much like Atoy, when they saw something that they were too young to fully understand. People often forget that you, as the player, are a character in the world of Earthbound beyond Ness and Company. Beyond representing the party's loss of innocence, Giygas is meant to represent your loss of innocence as the player, hence why even from our perspective, Giygas' attacks are unintelligible. There are a few more key pieces of evidence that further support my theory, but before I talk about them, I need to discuss the Giygas abortion theory, as these key pieces of the puzzle are essential to disproving it. The Giygas abortion theory proposes the idea that the party goes back in time to abort Giygas when he was a fetus, before he becomes powerful enough to conquer Earth. The theory postulates that the Devil's Machine's organic appearance is due to it being an artificial womb for Giygas, that the presence of what appears to be a fetus hidden in the negative space of Giygas' battle sprite is meant to represent Giygas literally being an unborn fetus, and the dialogue from Giygas randomly interspersed throughout the battle is supposed to mirror the experience of getting an abortion. This is the general idea of the theory, and upon first glance, they paint an incredibly convincing picture. However, when put under further scrutiny, the cracks in the theory begin to show. Key point number 1, this cave. This is the single most insane piece of evidence people share to support this theory. This is the cave that leads to the Devil's Machine, which if the theory is to be believed, is meant to represent a womb. Now, if the Devil's Machine is meant to represent a womb, that can only mean that this cave is meant to represent one thing. You know what it is. Hell, I'm not saying it. My grandma watches my videos for Christ's sakes. And I think she would have a heart attack if she heard a word even vaguely resembling that come from my mouth. Do I need to censor this? So, this cave is either meant to represent A, a totally normal f***ing cave, or B, an intergalactic... Take your pick! Okay, so that point may be a little stupid. Okay, actually really stupid, but that doesn't fully disprove the theory on its own. One bad apple doesn't ruin the batch. Well, fortunately for me, we're not looking at a lone bad apple in a basket. Rather, it's one filled to the brim with their rotting remains. From a lore perspective, the biggest problem I have with this theory is that it ultimately suggests that Giygas was born on Earth. While yes, Ness and crew do travel back in time, they don't move locations or planets. Hell, it's established in the predecessor that Giygas as a child wasn't even from Earth, seeing how George and Maria are abducted to raise the young Giygas. Not to mention the fact that Ness travels thousands of years into the past, while George and Maria raising Giygas is something that happened in 1906. I will give the theory the benefit of the doubt here. Using Earthbound Beginnings as evidence here is a bit of a reach, since the connections between the two games are heavily debated. The only real evidence we have of Earthbound being a direct sequel to Beginnings is that the subtitle of the game is Giygas Strikes Back in the original Japanese release, which seems to suggest that this was a return of Giygas. It's so vague, in fact, that many people believe Earthbound's simply an improved retelling of Beginnings due to their similarities, effectively serving as one of the earliest examples of a video game reboot. However, that still doesn't explain how Mr. Saturn explains Giygas' whereabouts in the lead up to the climax.
Kidnapped I was. Boing. Kidnapper. Bad guy. Bad guy gone. Zoom. Where? To the past. Ding ding.
This is what Mr. Saturn explains to the player, which seems to suggest that the Giygas we've been fighting throughout the game traveled to escape his inevitable defeat, not anticipating the party being able to harness the ability to time travel. Giygas possessing the ability to time travel has already been established by how Giygas himself comes from the future to kill Ness before he even has a chance to stop him, as prophesized by the Apple of Enlightenment. That's why Buzz at the beginning of the game comes from the future to warn Ness. Giygas isn't of Ness's time, rather an adversary from the future. The beast we battle at the end of the game isn't something that's always been there. It was a last-ditch effort by Giygas to escape his defeat after Ness's strength became one with the Earth itself. This point is only further proved by the dialogue that the party shares with Porky before and during the fight.
Ness. Are you surprised? It's me. Porky. I assist only the strong and able. That's Porky. You guys look pathetic. The Apple of Enlightenment has already made a prediction. But I won't let what the Apple of Enlightenment predicted take place. You guys will be beaten by Giygas. Giygas will be stronger, a more powerful entity than any other. Why? 'Cause of me. I was led by Giygas, and now I'm here. The Apple of Enlightenment couldn't predict this. Master Giygas. No, Giygas is no longer the wielder of evil. He has become the embodiment of evil itself, which he cannot control on his own. He is the evil power. I understand you guys are already claiming to be heroes. Well, it is a gazillion years too early for you to oppose Giygas. You must feel pretty stupid to keep fighting without even knowing what Giygas looks like. If you were to ever see Giygas, you'd be so petrified with fear, you'd never be able to run away. That's how scary it is. So, do you want me to turn off the Devil's Machine? Well, prepare to be amazed. So, isn't this terrifying? I'm terrified too. Giygas cannot think rationally anymore. And he isn't even aware of what he's doing now. His own mind was destroyed by his incredible power. What an almighty idiot. Yep, that's what he is.
That was a lot to take in, but looking at a few key phrases further dictates the fact that this is the same Giygas that Porky's been answering to throughout the entire game. Giygas cannot think rationally anymore. Giygas will be stronger, a more powerful entity than any other. Each of these phrases paint the picture that this is the current day Giygas, simply whisked into the past. Him suddenly losing the capability of rational thought implies that he was once capable of rational thinking, which wouldn't make any sense if he's supposed to be a literal fetus. Giygas will be stronger, a more powerful entity than any other, suggests that this is the strongest that Giygas has ever been, which once again makes no sense if this is supposed to be an unborn version of Giygas. Also, I feel it incredibly important to draw attention to the fact that the Devil's Machine's face mirrors the face of Ness, which if this is supposed to be a fetus, makes zero sense. Remember, Ness and the party are no longer in their own bodies at this point in the game, rather having their minds transposed into robots for them to operate. So the only way that this Giygas would be able to mirror Ness's face is if it's seen Ness before, which is simply impossible if this is supposed to be baby Giygas. Furthermore, the suggestion that the dialogue is supposed to mirror an abortion is odd. Some of the lines fit, sure.
It's not right. Not right. Not right. I'm so sad, Ness. It hurts. It hurts. Go. B-A-C-K.
These lines of dialogue fit very well with the theory. However, I think that pointing to only a fraction of the dialogue and saying it supports it is strange, especially when the remaining pieces make very little sense with this interpretation in mind.
I'm H-A-P-P-Y. Friends. I feel. G-O-O-D. Ness. 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 Ness.
Where exactly do these lines fit into the theory? Many people have said that this dialogue is directly inspired by what's said in the scene that traumatized a toy. However, nothing in the movie comes even remotely close to what's said here. Contrary to popular belief, this dialogue isn't a rip from the movie, as the dialogue was created by a toy and a programmer of the game, Machan Miura. They would spit lines back and forth to each other until they ended up with the final result. And when they ended, each of their faces were stained with tears. This dialogue isn't meant to represent a specific event, rather a universal one, which, as I said earlier, I believe is the loss of someone's innocence. From an in-universe perspective too, this dialogue serving to represent an abortion makes very little sense. Giygas has destroyed his own mind, and by Porky's own admission, he isn't aware of what's happening or what he's doing. If that's the case, then how's it possible that he's aware that Ness and the gang are trying to prevent him from being born? That's why the phrases said throughout the battle are contradictory. Not because it was supposed to represent the morally gray actions of the party, rather because the entity that they're coming from has had its mind broken, and it's simply spouting nonsense. The final nail in the coffin for this theory comes down to the most shocking and believable piece of evidence, being the image of a fetus in Giygas' sprite. This is a hard one to explain really, since I think it's too specific of a shape and too close of a match for it to be a simple coincidence. I personally do think that this was an intentional design choice. However, I don't think that the image of a baby was meant to represent a literal child, and this ties back into my own theory on what the final battle with Giygas is supposed to represent, as well as the overarching themes of Earthbound. Ultimately, Earthbound's about these 4 children growing up. We see Ness having to leave his own home to fulfill a greater purpose, Paula fighting back against the influence that nearly led to her death, Jeff takes a risky leave in the hopes of helping those in need, and Pooh follow his responsibilities as royalty to help Ness defeat Giygas. We see these characters overcome their fears and learn to be more responsible. This is best shown through the growth of Ness, who at the beginning of the game is noted to be a little bit fat. Contrast this with the ending of the game, where no one mentions this anymore, and how his mom mentions how strong he's become. This is meant to symbolize the growth these characters have undergone, and how much their journeys changed them, especially after the final confrontation with Giygas. I think I can speak for everyone when I say that having a game that's about growing up, ending with a battle that doesn't really do anything to bring that narrative to a close would be incredibly unsatisfying. This unsatisfying conclusion is one presented in the abortion theory. What does abortion have to do with the player's journey and growing up? This wasn't a game about the influence choices have on others or anything remotely close to that. Ultimately, the abortion theory is a vulgar misinterpretation that strings along a narrative woven together by fundamental misunderstandings of the themes, imagery, and sounds presented to the player. It takes massive logical leaps of faith in an effort to prove itself as true, when in reality, what likely began as a fun idea by a fan, slowly melted into an interpretation made solely to shock as many people as possible in an effort to gain notoriety. An effort that was not in vain, since this has since become one of the most widely discussed gaming theories of all time. I dislike the abortion theory so much, since if it were true, it does very little to bring the game's themes to a satisfying conclusion. It leaves the final battle standing as a confrontation entirely divorced from the rest of the game, which I don't think a toy or anyone involved would have wanted. So, since I don't think the abortion theory is true, how can I say that I think the baby imagery was intentional? Well, how much more innocent can something be than a baby? Throughout the battle, we see this mess of faces, contort and screaming in pain, slowly overtake the image of a fetus. The image of a baby wasn't put there to symbolize that Giygas is a literal fetus. It was put there to draw a juxtaposition between the party and player at the beginning of the game versus now, as their innocence is ultimately ripped from them in their last stand against a cosmic horror. While in the end, yes, the party does stand victorious, that doesn't change what they experienced. The horror of seeing your friends fell to attacks you can't even fully understand, as the world around you is consumed by this entity whose mind's been destroyed and only has one purpose: to kill you. That's why alongside the visage of pain, the image of a baby is destroyed alongside Giygas. Just as we, the players, have overcome what made us lose our innocence, it doesn't change the fact that it was stripped from us. Even though I feel I've provided sufficient evidence proving the abortion theory false, as well as supporting my own theory, I can't definitively say that my theory is absolutely what Atoy was going for. Atoy has always been a tad tight-lipped regarding the true intentions behind the Giygas battle. I think it's clear that he doesn't want to outright spell it out for us, and that's great. I think it's awesome that he's provided enough pieces to the puzzle that's led to rampant fan speculation for decades. Ultimately, like all art, the Giygas battle is what you take from it. No matter what, I don't think anyone will have a 100% perfectly identical interpretation of this battle, solely due to how much our lives influence us. No one has lived the same life as me. I've met wonderful people who you'll never have the pleasure of meeting, as I'm sure you've met similarly great people that I'll never be able to meet. I've experienced a wide variety of things that you may never experience, and vice versa. My regrets, my decisions, my friends, my family, all of these up to this point are wildly different from yours, and pretending that these factors don't play into how I interpret Earthbound's final battle is foolish. Giygas is a giant mashup of these strange sounds, visuals, and dialogue that, to me, seem to be trying to replicate the experience of growing up and losing your innocence. It's the interpretation that makes the most sense to me based on the themes of the game, the circumstances surrounding its creation, and how I feel these strange stimuli were meant to be read. However, Earthbound played a huge part in helping me grow up, so perhaps I'm projecting a bit. Even though I'm unsure if my interpretation is what was intended, that doesn't change the fact that that's what I gain from it. Much like your interpretation may vary from mine, as long as you gain something from it, that's a-okay. However, even if we may never have a true answer for what Giygas is meant to represent, that doesn't mean theories surrounding it are immune to criticism. When it comes to theory crafting, and media analysis as a whole, it's important to take a step back and look at the facts from an objective standpoint to make sure you aren't making outrageous connections solely to support your analysis. The abortion theory is a spiderweb of these outrageous claims, supported by evidence that doesn't hold up when put under scrutiny. Even though we may never find out what Giygas was truly meant to represent, the abortion theory is an appallingly bad interpretation of the battle that makes zero sense and should be looked at as nothing more than a farce. Special thanks to Alstroem for lending his voice to Porky and Mr. Saturn. He's one of the earliest friends I made through making these videos, so it was a tad surreal to finally feature him, even though if it was just a brief cameo. Links to his socials will be in the description below. And finally, thank you for watching! This is a video I've been wanting to make for a while, so I'm glad I was finally able to do it. If you liked this video, please be sure to let me know, and maybe consider subscribing if you'd like to see more stuff like this in the future. And if you didn't like it, please let me know what I can do to improve. Anyways, I'll be seeing you all next time. Later.